The other day, a teacher friend of mine asked me how to set up centers. She was or is a first grade teacher in her third year of teaching and hadn't done them before because she thought they would be overwhelming. So I sat down with her for an hour over the summer to plan them out, and by the end, she was amazed at how simple it actually was. And today I'm going to walk you through how to set up your centers so they run themselves and they're not that hard to plan and prep for. So, with that being said, let's dive in.
Hey, teacher bestie. My name's Helena, and I'm the creator of the Present Teacher Podcast. I'm a first year teacher coach, and in this podcast, you are going to learn everything from simple, actionable classroom management, social emotional learning, and teacher wellness strategies. You know that impact you want to make in the classroom? Well, we're going to make it happen here.
So the first thing we're going to talk about is actually planning centers. So what we're going to do is we're going to decide how many centers to do. So look at how many students you have in your class or decide how many you want to teach or have at a center at a time. And or you can look at how many groups you naturally have. So, for example, my desks in my classroom are arranged into groups, and I naturally want to do 4 to 5 centers. So, I would naturally divide how many students I have into 4 or 5, and that's how many students per center I would have, but I just naturally want to have 4 or 5 centers. So decide how many centers are you going to do, and then from there, we're going to decide what to teach or what to have at each center or station. So now that we talked about deciding how many centers to do, let's talk about deciding what you want to teach at each center. So let's talk about math centers or stations first. So decide the focus or theme for each center or station. Here are some examples of what you might have as a focus at each center or station, especially if you teach primary, although you could take these, adjust the skills to whatever you are covering at your grade level or at your content level. So, for example, number sense, addition or subtraction, shapes, technology, and games. These are the topics I typically have in my math centers, and they are what I focus on at each center. So, those are just a rough couple ideas, but feel free to go with whatever feels aligned with you, or just go online and look at what other people are doing for their centers in regards to your specific grade level. Now that we talked about math centers or stations, let's talk about reading. So first thing you want to do is, again, decide a theme or a center for each station. So good examples for primary are library or independent reading, independent writing, technology, word work, CVC, spelling words, stuff like that, grammar, and sight words. So coming up with different ideas that match your grade level or the skills or the standards you're teaching at your specific grade level is really going to be important here. And think of a theme that you can teach throughout the year that's going to be easy to switch out of. For example, I'm not going to choose two-digit addition only. I'm going to make it addition and subtraction because in second grade we do 2 and 3-digit, something like that. Making sure it's broad enough to where you can use it all year, but not too, not too broad that it's going to be hard to plan for either. So now that we have decided what to focus on at each center, decide how often to rotate. So look at how long in your schedule you have to dedicate to centers each day and decide how long each center will be. And then decide how often to rotate. So an example is, let's say I have 30 minutes in my schedule for reading for centers and 30 minutes in my schedule for math for centers, as an example. Then I'm going to decide to do 2 centers each day at 15 minutes each at each center. Then, so I know that Monday, Tuesday, I'm going to do 2 centers each day for reading, 2 centers for math at those designated times, and they're going to be 15 minutes long, and that'll get me through enough time for my students to get through the center and enough time for them to transition. or I might do 13 minutes or however long if I need to accommodate a little bit for transitions and setting up. So after I do that, I can decide on the four centers or stations. So, for example, let's say that I decide, you know what, to make it easier, I'm going to do four centers. We'll do math, for example, or reading, for example. I'm going to have independent reading, independent writing, CVC words, and technology. Those are my four. And I'm going to do 15 minutes each, and I'm going to have everybody rotate through all of them, or I'm going to have two rotations a day. So we're going to cover two stations each day. So when I have it set up that day, it means that one group will do centers one and two on Monday, then centers three and four on Tuesday. And then they're going to go back through centers one and two on Thursday and centers four and five on Friday, which means all my kids are going to rotate all the centers at least twice each week because of how the schedule is set up. So that means I don't actually have to plan out different centers for every day. I only need to come up with two different activities for the centers each week. So that's a great way to kind of figure out how often you're going to have to plan and how often you're going to have to come up with different content for the setters. So now that you've decided how often to rotate, let's talk about how to prep the centers or the stations. So the first thing I want to recommend that you do is take inventory of resources you already have that you can use. So gather all the resources you have for the center. For example, if I were to go look at the geometry one, for example, I'm going to look at all the resources I have for geometry for teaching second grade centers and take inventory of what I have so I know what I can rotate through or what I can use already. And then start planning out what you will do the first 2 days and then the second 2 days. So if I stick with, I'm going to have four centers and I'm going to have them do a Monday, Tuesday, and then Thursday, Friday. Wednesday, we're not doing centers because we have a short day or for whatever reason. Or maybe we're going to do a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Friday's a makeup day in case for some reason something happens or we're doing something else. So then I'm going to start planning out what they'll do the first 2 days. The first 2 days, they're going to do a worksheet on three-dimensional shapes. And then the second rotation, they're going to use models to create three-dimensional shapes and identify three-dimensional shapes. So let's go to writing. I come up with a writing activity on opinion writing for the first 2 days. On the second 2 days, they need to write an opinion on whether or not we should, wear school uniforms, for example. So coming up with two activities each week for each center. For technology, maybe the first 2 days they're going to do iStation learning, and then the second 2 days they're going to do Prodigy, for example, Prodigy reading, um, whatever that might look like. So it takes the planning of having to plan every day and making it a lot simpler. The second thing I recommend for prepping centers is to, as I said, take inventory of what you already have, gather all the resources you have for that center, start planning out what they'll do the first 2 days, then the second 2 days. A great hack is to actually use binder protectors or clear sleeves to cut back on the amount of printing and prepping for the next year. So let's say I have a worksheet or an activity that doesn't require cutting or gluing for our, I don't know, our math, our addition and subtraction, or a number sense one, I can put them in clear sleeves, make sure I have enough clear sleeves with that paper or that worksheet for everybody in the center. So let's say I have 5 kids per center. I only need 5 clear sleeves with that worksheet. I only need 5 worksheets. I can put that worksheet in the clear sleeve and then I can take it out and then file it away for next year. I can make a little filing, part of my filing cabinet be for center work, and then I could just pull them out and reuse them for the following year. And another hack I have is to use hands-on games or manipulatives to save time, not to only rely on worksheets. For example, games like Kaboom, having a deck of cards. There's tons of center resources on Teachers Pay Teachers from other teachers, for centers, for example. All of those are going to be really great um, things for you to use during stations, and it kind of boosts engagement as opposed to using worksheets the entire time. Another thing, recommendation I have is to laminate when possible. So, a great example of this is for writing. So, in second grade, we do a lot of writing. And what I would do is I would take random coloring sheets I would find free on TPT, and I would cut out pictures from these worksheets that had a bunch of different pictures in them. And I would cut a group of three objects together. So I would cut, and there would be if it was a winter one, a snowman, a hot chocolate, and a gingerbread house, for example. Those three would be together when I cut around the three, and my students would pull them out and they had to write a story about those three things. I would laminate those pictures so I could reuse them year after year after year. And I don't have to re-prep them after I've already done it. I can reuse them for the next year to save time and to save, planning time and thinking time. So that's the thing, one of the things I recommend. So after you've done all that, and those are some of the tips, how can you make planning easier and prepping easier for the centers? I recommend picking a day to plan centers. So pick one day a week to plan centers for the next following week. So for example, let's say that I'm ready to start doing centers and we start next week. I'm going to take Monday, for example. I'm going to lesson plan all my core content for next week, and then I'm going to pick centers that match my core content for next week's centers. So let's say, for example, in second grade, we're learning about two-digit numbers, just number sense, just reviewing. I'm going to pick activities in my centers for that center that focuses on two-digit numbers for number sense. And so it makes planning a lot easier, and my centers and my core content work together, so it's reinforcing one another. So I personally like to plan on Mondays. Mondays are the day that during my prep, before school, after school, I'm looking at what's the core content, I plan out my core content, and then I pick centers that support what we're learning that week. The second thing I recommend is to pick a day to prep your centers. So after you plan your centers, then I want you to pick a day to prep your centers. So let's say that on Monday, I planned all my core content and all my sitters. On Tuesday, the following day, I'm going to go and actually prep out all the things I'm going to need for next week's core content and centers. So, as I said, Monday I wrote lesson plans. Tuesday I'm going to go to the copier, make the copies, laminate, do what I got to do to prep for centers for the following week. I'm going to prep, two centers based off my example. So each one, everybody's going to go through them twice. So I need two activities for my centers, and we're done. So making it simple, easy, and when you focus on one thing over your prep, you're less likely to take as long because you're not having to switch from one task to another. So if I decide, all right, today I'm simply planning. All I'm doing is I'm looking at activities, planning my core content, and planning my centers. That's what I'm doing. All right, Tuesday comes, I'm taking all my lesson plans, all those activities, and I'm actually going to go print them out now. So when you do that, you're giving yourself enough time to fully get through that. And it's a lot easier to do all of that at once than to do 10, 5 pieces here and there, trying to take all day to get something done, essentially. So now that we talked about easier ways to plan and prep your centers, let's talk about how you can organize your centers. So as I mentioned earlier, Mondays are typically the days that I lesson plan my centers. Tuesdays are typically the day I prep them. What do I do once I prep them? Surely I don't just have a huge pile of centers sitting on my desk. I definitely don't. So the first thing I have is a hanging filing folder by my door with the days of the week on it. So I'll have a hanging filing folder. It says Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. What I do is Mondays, I write my lesson plans. Tuesdays, I prep them out, and then I put those centers in whatever day it goes in. So, for example, I have all the centers my students are going to use on Monday and Tuesday, I'm going to put them in the Monday file folder. I have all the centers my students are going to use Wednesday, Thursday, I'm going to put them in the Wednesday file folder. That way, they're organized by the door. I'm not tempted to put them on my desk and let them clutter. They are there for me, easy to grab. So when Monday comes around, I take the Monday centers out of the Monday file folder. On Wednesday, when I go to switch out the centers, I just grab Wednesday centers and I go and I disperse them out. So where do I disperse them to? So first I have the hanging filing folder that holds, that's my holding center for all my center stuff or all even my core content I use. I just put them in the days of the week that I'm going to need them. And then I have a cart for centers. So I have a cart that students can get in and out of for centers. I've also seen people use though like buckets or baskets or organizers, especially from places like the Dollar Tree, whatever works best for you. But I switch them out the morning of or the day before. So for example, let's say it's Monday, I need to switch out my centers from last week. I walk over to my holding center, which is my hanging filing folder. I pick up all the centers that are in the Monday folder or filing folder, and I go to wherever I'm holding my centers area and I put them in the 4 different centers we're doing. And then I'm done. And I take the old ones, I decide if I'm going to keep them, throw them away, reuse them. I'll file them away if I'm going to reuse them, and I call it good. So that's a great way to switch out. And then let's say Wednesday after school, I have a little time before I need to leave. So I'm going to walk over to Wednesday. I need to switch out our centers. So I'm going to grab all the resources from Wednesday that I planned the week before. I'm going to look at my centers and I'm going to disperse them to the different centers that they're going to go to the next day for the next day. And then I take the old ones and I decide if I'm going to keep them, throw them away, reuse them, and then go from there. So that wraps up everything in regards to planning and prepping centers. Honestly, they don't take that much work. I honestly love centers, unpopular opinion, and it doesn't take that much time once you get into a rhythm. So we talked about how to not only plan centers, but we also talked about how to prep centers. So that wraps up everything in regards to centers. What was your biggest takeaway from this week's content? Let me know in the comments. Also, this is actually part of a series over the next 3 weeks or 2 weeks after this. We're going to be talking more about centers. So this is part 1. We're going to go all the way to part 3 for now. I might decide to add more later. So make sure to tune in, make sure to follow or subscribe, leave a review, make sure to follow along wherever you're tuning in from. That way you don't miss part 2 and part 3 of this centers series. If you liked this classroom management strategies, I definitely recommend you check out my free classroom management guide. It has the top 10 questions I get asked in regards to managing a classroom. I went on a podcast and a YouTube video, talked about it in more depth, and then I created a free guide that links to all of that content for you. So you don't have to sift through my weeks of content now on classroom management. You can just go to the question that you might have, read my answer, and if you want a more in-depth answer, you can then click to the video or the podcast episode where I give a further explanation. If you want templates, classroom management templates, I recommend you check out my classroom management bundle. This bundle has all the templates you're going to need in regards to managing a classroom, everything from my goodness, classroom procedure slides, classroom jobs, super improved goals, all that jazz, and they're in different themes. And even if you kind of just want ideas on what this could look like in your classroom, definitely recommend checking those out. If you want to take it a step further and you want to see more of the systems on how I run my classroom, I definitely recommend checking out the Present Teacher Circle. The Present Teacher Circle is my community for new and first year teachers where I show you everything you need to know about automating your classroom. The first couple months or the first couple modules, we talk about classroom management in depth. We do a 15-day challenge. There's 2 modules of content, And I even give you 15 different scenarios of common disruptive behaviors and how I would solve them. So, for example, you have a student who's always blurting out in class. How would I go about solving that? I give you the step by step on what's going on in my mind and all the steps I would take to solve it. So, you kind of have a guide, like a coaching guide on how I would coach you or how I would do that in my classroom. So, you can take it as inspiration and make it your own. What I love about this program is you can focus, there's so much more than just classroom management. We talk about planning and prepping and grading and all like communication, everything you're going to need to know as a new teacher. We talk about all the different systems you can have in your class, and you can go through the content any way you'd like. You get access to all of the content immediately. So if you want to focus first on planning, you can jump to the planning sections. You want to focus then on classroom management, jump to that section. It is very much a choose your own adventure. And like I said, challenges, lessons, templates, all sorts of things. So definitely go check that out if you want more content and more strategies behind automating your classroom. All right, that wraps it up. Thank you so much for joining me. As always, remember we're stronger together, and I'll see you in the next one, Teacher Bestie. Bye.
Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. I hope that you were able to take away some value that will help you thrive inside and out of the classroom. It would mean the world to me if you could take 5 seconds right now and leave a review on this podcast. And if you found this podcast especially helpful, make sure to take a screenshot of this episode right now and tag me on your socials to let me know you're listening. As always, remember that we are stronger together with all the love in the world. Helena, aka the Present Teacher. See you next time, Teacher Bestie.